Hey, I'm Ethan. I used to think family stood for something, for loyalty, for having your back. But when the people who shared my blood, the ones who were supposed to champion me, threw me to the wolves with a cold smile, well, I learned a very different, much harder lesson. And what I did next, the path I chose after that sting of betrayal, let's just say they never ever saw it coming. The annual executive summit for Vance Industries, man, it was always a production. Held on the penthouse floor of their gleaming Chicago headquarters, this glass-encased monstrosity that lorded over the river, a monument to their self-proclaimed legacy. It had been 6 long years since I'd last set foot in this building. 6 years. I was 24 back then, fresh out of Northwestern with a double master's, finance and systems engineering. Sharp, ambitious, and yeah, a little naive, I guess. I thought that meant something to them. That was also the day my job application, my heartfelt plea to join the family business, was publicly and very coldly shot down by my own aunt, Eleanor Vance. Today, though, I wasn't walking back in as Ethan Hayes, the hopeful nephew, the dismissed outsider. No, today I returned as the CEO of Apex Solutions. And here's the kicker. Apex Solutions was very quietly Vance Industries' largest, most critical client. We were funneling over $60 million a year through their logistics division. They just didn't have a clue it was me. Not yet. The quarterly report looks promising, my cousin Derek was saying, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous boardroom. He clicked through another slide in his over-designed, underwhelming PowerPoint deck. He always did have more style than substance. Thanks in large part to our anchor client, Apex Solutions. I took a slow sip of my lukewarm espresso, the bitter taste a welcome distraction, trying to mask the ghost of a grin threatening to break free. Oh, I remembered Derek's voice all right. I could hear it clear as day from 6 years ago, a sneering, condescending tone at some awful family gathering right after my rejection. "Come on, Ethan," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder with that false camaraderie. "You're a smart kid, sure, but let's be real. You don't actually belong in a place like this. This is different. Family loyalty and pedigree, that's what matters here, Derek." Aunt Eleanor beamed at him from the head of the massive polished mahogany table, her voice dripping with matriarchal pride. "Excellent analysis, as always. This, everyone, is precisely why we keep leadership in the bloodline." In the bloodline. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, just like they had 6 years ago. I glanced down at my tablet, my own set of numbers discreetly displayed on the screen. Real numbers. Data quietly, meticulously pulled from their internal files over months, thanks to a very disgruntled, very helpful whistleblower deep within their accounting department. Derek, my OSA-competent cousin, had been cooking the books, falsifying performance metrics, for nearly a damn year. Losses were hidden under mountains of jargon, shortfalls patched over with phantom projections. The cold, hard truth was that the only thing keeping Vance Industries afloat, the only thing propping up their carefully constructed facade of success, was my company. My contracts. "Mr. Hayes?" A soft, hesitant voice pulled me from my thoughts. It was Olivia, Aunt Eleanor's perpetually flustered executive assistant. She gestured with a trembling hand toward the main boardroom doors, which were slightly ajar. They're ready for your presentation now." I rose slowly, taking a moment to adjust the lapel of my custom-tailored deep navy suit. It was a Zegna, fitted to perfection, a stark, deliberate contrast to the ill-fitting, off-the-rack department store suit I'd worn when I'd practically begged for a junior analyst seat at this very table all those years ago. The suit I'd saved up for months to buy, hoping to look the part. I remembered Aunt Eleanor's dismissive glance back then, her lips curling into a subtle sneer as she'd told me I just didn't have the Vance look, that I wasn't Vance material. Oh, the irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. As I moved towards the podium at the front of the room, Derek's voice, sharp and laced with sudden confusion, cut across the expectant hush. "Ethan, what in the hell are you doing here? This is a closed board meeting, for family and senior executives only." I let my gaze travel slowly across the long table, lingering for a beat on each surprised, then rapidly paling face. My Aunt Eleanor, her regal composure starting to fray around the edges. Derek, looking like he'd just seen a ghost. My other cousin, Sophia Vance, who'd always been a bit more sympathetic but never brave enough to speak up, actually dropped her expensive stylus with a clatter that sounded deafening in the sudden silence. "I'm here on behalf of Apex Solutions," I stated, my voice calm, even betraying none of the storm brewing inside me. "We have some significant concerns, and we need to renegotiate several critical contract terms before we even consider renewal." The room, already teetering on the edge of chaos, completely stalled. You could hear a pin drop. Aunt Eleanor narrowed her eyes, her carefully constructed mask of authority cracking. That's not how this works, Ethan. Apex Solutions always sends Mr. Peterson, their designated representative from the external advisory group. A small, humorless smile touched my lips. "They do, and today, you're looking at him." Peterson reports to me. Silence. Absolute, stunned silence. Derek looked like he'd forgotten how to blink, his mouth hanging open. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with dawning comprehension. The weight of realization, heavy and unwelcome, crept across their faces, one by one. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, and I was the one holding the steering wheel. That's not possible," Aunt Eleanor finally choked out, her voice a hoarse whisper. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the arms of her chair. You run some small tech startup, a little consulting firm. We did a full background check when Apex first approached us. It was thorough." I tapped the screen of my tablet, and my own slide deck, meticulously prepared, flashed onto the massive screen behind me, replacing Derek's mess of fabricated triumphs. That small startup, Aunt Eleanor, was a front, a very carefully constructed, very well-funded front. Apex Solutions, formerly known as EOS Strategic Consulting, is mine. I've owned it, built it, and run it from the ground up for the past 6 years. Gasps, sharp and sudden, broke the suffocating silence. It was a symphony of shock. Little murmurs started, then grew louder. A wave of disbelief washing over the room. And just like that, the boy they'd dismissed, the nephew they'd told wasn't good enough, wasn't Vance material, had become the man their entire crumbling empire now unknowingly, desperately depended on. The first slide lit up with brutal, irrefutable clarity. Apex Solutions, audited financials. The numbers spoke for themselves. Annual revenue that tripled that of Vance Industries, offices in 12 countries, a global operational footprint that dwarfed their comfortable, complacent regional presence. And beneath that, a client list that read like a who's who of global commerce. 9 Fortune 500 companies, titans of industry, all relying on Apex. My company. I heard someone actually whimper. It might have been Derek. No, Derek finally lurched to his feet, his face a ghastly shade of pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked like he was about to be physically ill. That's not possible. You can't be. Can't be what, Derek? I asked, my voice steady, measured, cutting through his stammering. The same young man you and your buddies mocked at that internship mixer all those years ago, saying I was aiming too high? The nephew who just wasn't Vance enough to warrant a chance. Or, I paused, letting the weight of my next words sink in, the owner of the company that is currently, and quite literally, keeping your family's books from bleeding out all over this very expensive carpet. Murmurs erupted across the boardroom, no longer hushed whispers, but agitated, concerned voices. Board members, the non-family ones, were turning to each other, expressions of dawning horror and anger on their faces. We would have known, Derek insisted, his voice high-pitched, desperate. Someone would have told us. I arched an eyebrow, a gesture I'd unconsciously picked up from watching Aunt Eleanor dismiss countless underlings over the years. Would you have? The same way you knew about the $8,200,000 in losses your division conveniently hid through creative inventory manipulation and deferred revenue schemes. The schemes that, by the way, are blatantly fraudulent. Derek's jaw went slack. He looked like I'd punched him in the gut. Around him, the external board members were now whispering furiously, some already pulling out their phones, no doubt texting their lawyers. The carefully cultivated image of Vance Industries, the rock-solid legacy, was shattering before their very eyes. I've spent the last 6 years, every waking hour, turning Apex Solutions into what it is today, I said, my voice cool, devoid of the emotion that had churned inside me for so long. 6 years of sacrifice, of relentless work, of betting on myself when no one else would, especially not my own family. I let my gaze sweep across them, lingering on Eleanor and Derek. While you all clinked champagne glasses at family dinners, patting yourselves on the back for keeping me out of your precious, exclusive club, I was quietly, methodically becoming your lifeline. Aunt Eleanor's knuckles were bone white as she gripped the armrests of her chair so tightly I thought the wood might splinter. Her face was a mask of controlled fury, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something I hadn't seen in her before: fear. "Why?" she finally managed, her voice tight. "Why come forward like this now?" I clicked to the next slide. It was a stark, brutal analysis of Vance Industries' dependency on Apex Solutions. There was nothing subtle about it. 82% of their entire logistics division's revenue, 70% of all their projected new growth for the next fiscal year. Over half of their remaining client retention initiatives were riding on infrastructure and systems that Apex, my company, owned and controlled. "Because it's time to renegotiate our terms, Aunt Eleanor," I said, the formality a deliberate twist of the knife. "And based on what my team and I have uncovered in our due diligence, your son's rather creative accounting, the systemic mismanagement, the rapidly deteriorating financial health of this company, I'm honestly not sure there's much left here to salvage. Or frankly, much that I want to salvage." You can't just walk away," Derek stammered, his bravado completely gone, replaced by a raw, naked panic. "Those contracts, they're ironclad. We have agreements." "Those contracts, cousin, are up for renewal in exactly 5 business days," I cut in, my voice sharp, decisive. "And as the CEO and majority shareholder of Apex Solutions, I have very, very serious concerns about Vance Industries' stability, about its viability, about your stability, Derek, and your ability to lead a fantasy football team, let alone a multi-million-dollar division." The room exploded. It was instantaneous. Board members were on their feet, shouting, demanding explanations. Aunt Eleanor shot Derek a look so venomous it could have curdled milk from across the room. Sophia was muttering something about fiduciary duty and corporate liability, her face buried in her hands. The company lawyers, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, were suddenly animated, huddling together, their faces grim. I remained still, calm, composed amidst the chaos. I'd envisioned this moment 1,000 times, played it over and over in my head during lonely nights and grueling workdays. I let the storm hit them first, let them feel the foundations of their world shake. After a minute or two, when the initial wave of pandemonium began to subside into a cacophony of panicked accusations and desperate questions, I raised my hand slightly. Silence, or something close to it, gradually returned. "I'll be calling an emergency audit meeting for tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. sharp, here," I said, my voice cutting through the remaining din. I began gathering my tablet and a slim leather-bound notebook. "My forensic accounting team will present a full, detailed breakdown of your company's finances, the real finances. I suggest you all show up, and I suggest you come prepared to answer some very uncomfortable questions." This is revenge," Derek finally accused, his voice trembling with a potent mixture of fear and outrage. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "This is all because we didn't give you that stupid junior analyst job, because we didn't let you sit at the big kids' table." I paused at the doorway, my hand on the cool metal of the handle. The memory of that rejection 6 years ago flashed vividly in my mind. His smug, dismissive face, Aunt Eleanor's cold, appraising stare, as if I were an insect she was about to crush. The polite, but undeniably cruel, little ripple of laughter that had followed me out of the room as I'd walked away, head held high but my heart shattered into a million pieces, the shame burning in my cheeks. "No, Derek," I said, turning to look him dead in the eye. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of all those years. "This isn't revenge. This is business. The very thing you and Aunt Eleanor so confidently claimed I'd never, ever understand. The very thing you said I wasn't cut out for." I glanced pointedly at my watch, a Patek Philippe I'd bought myself when Apex hit its first 100 million in revenue. 9 a.m. Don't be late. Though, punctuality never really seemed to run in your side of the family, did it? As I stepped out into the hushed, carpeted hallway, the voices behind me immediately fractured into a fresh volley of accusations and panicked discussions. I could hear Aunt Eleanor's carefully controlled composure finally cracking, her voice rising in anger. I heard Derek, predictably, trying to justify the numbers, to spin yet another lie. It was music to my ears, in a dark sort of way. Noah Miller, my COO and right-hand man, the first person I'd hired when Apex was nothing more than an idea and a rented desk in a co-working space, was waiting by the private elevator bank. He was holding a chilled bottle of sparkling water and a single, perfectly chilled glass. He had an almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. "So," he said, handing me the water as the elevator doors whispered open. "How'd it go in there, boss?" I took a long sip of the cold water, the bubbles a welcome sensation on my dry throat. "Exactly as planned, Noah," I said, stepping into the elevator. A small, genuine smile finally touched my lips. Exactly as planned. He pressed the button for the lobby. "If you thought that little boardroom twist was satisfying, trust me, you won't want to miss what happens at tomorrow's audit meeting. It's going to be a show." As the elevator descended, whisking me away from the chaos I'd unleashed, I allowed myself a moment. I thought about Aunt Eleanor's face, that mask of regal superiority crumbling to reveal the raw shock and dawning fear beneath. I thought about Derek, panicked and pale, scrambling to defend numbers that had never been real, his entire sense of entitlement imploding. I thought about all the years they'd whispered behind my back at family functions, the polite but cutting remarks, the subtle exclusions, all reinforcing the narrative that I wasn't a fit, that I lacked the pedigree, the Vance essence, that I simply didn't belong in their world. "Send me the latest draft of the contract termination letter, Noah," I told him, my voice firm. "The one for Vance Industries. I want my eyes on it one last time before tomorrow morning." Noah, ever unflappable, just nodded. "You got it. Are you really going to pull out of all the contracts, Ethan? If they don't play ball, I mean, it's a significant chunk of revenue for us too, even if it's a lifeline for them." I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Let's just say, Noah, that by this time tomorrow, they'll finally understand what earned power actually looks like. They'll finally understand what real business is, and they'll understand that their choices have very real, very immediate consequences. Tomorrow, they wouldn't just be facing an audit. They'd be facing the culmination of 6 years of my relentless, focused effort. Tomorrow, the piper would finally get paid." The next morning, I arrived at Vance Industries headquarters a full hour early. It was the same imposing glass and steel tower that had once seemed so intimidating, so unbreachable. The lobby guard, a grizzled older guy named Sal, the very same Sal who'd been on duty 6 years ago when I'd slunk out after my rejection, practically jumped to his feet when he saw me approach the security desk. He fumbled with his radio, his eyes wide. Mr. Hayes, welcome, sir." He hesitated, then added, "The board members. Most of them are already gathering upstairs, in the main conference room. They've been here a while." "Early birds, Sal," I murmured, a wry smile playing on my lips as I signed the visitor log. A formality, but one I enjoyed. Funny what the distinct smell of impending collapse does to people's punctuality, isn't it? He just swallowed hard and nodded, avoiding my gaze. As I stepped into the executive elevator, the one reserved for the top brass, the polished chrome doors reflected back an image of a man they had never seen coming. A man they had created, in a way, through their own arrogance and dismissal. The young, hopeful nephew they'd so casually pushed aside was about to hold the pen that would script the next chapter of their fate. And it wasn't going to be a fairy tale. The boardroom was packed when I entered, exactly at 9 a.m. A thick, heavy silence blanketed the room, so palpable you could almost taste the fear and tension in the air. Aunt Eleanor sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her usual regal bearing somehow diminished, her presence hollowed out. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Derek sat hunched beside a pair of grim-faced corporate lawyers, flanked by an almost visible aura of tension and desperate denial. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The independent board members, the ones without the Vance surname, were already whispering amongst themselves, their brows furrowed as they flipped through the printed summaries of my team's initial findings, which had been distributed just moments before I walked in. Behind me, my team of 5 forensic analysts filed in silently. Each one handpicked by me, experts in their field. And each one, unbeknownst to Vance Industries, had been quietly, meticulously embedded, as consultants on various minor projects within their company over the past 18 months, collecting data, observing operations, and identifying weaknesses while the Vance heirs played their endless legacy games and patted each other on the back. I took my place at the podium, the same one Derek had stood at just 24 hours earlier, spewing his confident lies. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice smooth, professional, devoid of any overt triumph. "Shall we begin?" Aunt Eleanor cleared her throat, her voice stripped of its usual commanding edge, now thin and reedy. "Ethan, Mr. Hayes, before we get into the details of this audit, perhaps you and I and Derek could speak privately for a moment for the sake of the family." I tilted my head slightly, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but one that carried immense weight in that charged atmosphere. "Aunt Eleanor," I replied, my voice still soft, but with an underlying edge of steel. "I think we've had more than enough private family conversations over the years, don't you? Conversations where my input wasn't particularly valued. Today, everything is on the table, for everyone to see." I nodded crisply toward Noah, who was standing near the door with a stack of thick binders. "Noah, if you would, please distribute the full reports to all board members." The sound of heavy binders thudding onto the polished table, followed by the rustle of thick paper, was like the wind heralding a coming storm. Then, the sharp, indrawn gasps started, rippling around the room as board members began to read. One elderly director, a man who had served on the board for over 20 years, swore softly but distinctly under his breath. This can't possibly be right," muttered another director, a woman known for her sharp financial acumen, as she flipped rapidly through the pages, her face paling with each turn. "These losses, these write-offs, the sheer scale of these discrepancies." "Oh, they're accurate, Ms. Albright. Painfully so, I'm afraid," I confirmed, pulling up my own comprehensive presentation on the large screen. It was a deep dive, a forensic autopsy of a dying company. "Let's start with the creative accounting practices, shall we? Specifically, the ones employed by the logistics division under Mr. Derek Vance's direct supervision." I looked directly at Derek, whose face was now ashen. His lawyer started to raise a hand, to object, but I simply held up my own, silencing him. "Derek," I continued, my voice even, almost conversational, "would you care to explain to the board how over $8,200,000 in operational losses were systematically tucked away under miscellaneous capital expenditures and deferred R&D amortization over the last 4 quarters? Or perhaps you'd prefer we fast forward to the section on inflated client acquisition metrics, the phantom assets listed on your balance sheet? Or maybe we should just cut to the chase, the part where, without the ongoing revenue stream from Apex Solutions contracts, Vance Industries is, for all intents and purposes, technically insolvent, facing bankruptcy within, I'd estimate, 90 days? You're trying to destroy us," Derek finally blurted out, his voice cracking, a desperate, cornered animal. "Our family's legacy, everything our grandfather built." I stared at him, my expression unwavering, unmoved by his pathetic appeal to a sentiment he himself had never truly honored. "No, Derek, you, and those who enabled you, did that all on your own. I'm merely shining a very bright, very unflattering light on the mess you've created. Think of me as a rather expensive and decidedly unwelcome truth serum." "To your own family?" Derek choked out, his eyes darting towards his mother, pleading for intervention. "How could you do this to your own blood?" I raised an eyebrow. That old chestnut again. "Family, Derek? Are we talking about the same concept of family? You mean the family that, as you so helpfully informed half the Chicago business community at various networking events, believed I wasn't cut out for corporate leadership? Or perhaps you're referring to the family whose matriarch, Aunt Eleanor, laughed in my face, quite literally laughed, and told me I'd never understand real business because I didn't have the Vance instinct?" My gaze shifted to Eleanor, who flinched as if struck. That was 6 years ago, Ethan," Aunt Eleanor said, her voice a little too quick, a little too defensive. "People say things. You were young." "Yes, it was. 6 very long, very formative years ago," I agreed, my voice softening dangerously. "And while you and your son were so diligently occupied with guarding the precious family crest, polishing old trophies, and systematically running this company into the ground through a potent combination of arrogance, incompetence, and outright fraud, I was out there, in the real world, building something. Something tangible, something valuable, from scratch, with my own two hands and whatever grit I could muster. I clicked to the next slide. The numbers, stark and undeniable, didn't lie. A series of bar graphs and pie charts painted a devastating picture of Vance Industries' true financial health versus the meteoric, legitimate rise of Apex Solutions. My company was now, by every measurable metric, triple the size of their entire operation. As of this morning, I stated, my voice resonating with quiet authority, 47% of Vance Industries' declared annual revenue is directly and solely tied to contracts with Apex Solutions. 47%. Revenue that will, I assure you, vanish into thin air come Monday morning if I choose to exercise the termination clauses in our agreements. Clauses, I might add, that your own legal team drafted and approved. The room erupted again. But this time, it wasn't just unfocused panic. It was targeted, angry. Voices layered over each other. Chairs scraped back as non-family board members stood, gesticulating, their faces flushed with fury and a dawning sense of betrayal. Lawyers were huddled in tight, anxious knots, their hushed consultations barely audible above the din. One of the independent directors, a usually stoic woman named Carol Albright, actually slammed her fist on the table and swore, loudly and explicitly. And then, Derek finally, completely, broke. He slumped in his chair as if his strings had been cut, his face a mask of defeated despair. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he muttered, his voice barely a whisper, audible only to those closest to him. It snowballed. You can't just pull out, Ethan. Please, think of the employees, the legacy. Aunt Eleanor, however, wasn't quite ready to capitulate. She stood, drawing herself up to her full, though now somewhat diminished height, her face flushed with a desperate, impotent fury. We'll take legal action. We'll sue you for breach of good faith. For corporate sabotage. I met her furious gaze with a calm, almost pitying look. On what grounds, Aunt Eleanor? I asked, my voice turning cool, clinical. That your once dismissed nephew built a more successful company than your entire executive suite combined? That your son's extensive and rather clumsy fraudulent reporting was uncovered before the SEC had a chance to launch their own, undoubtedly more public and far more damaging investigation? That I'm trying to protect my own company's interests by refusing to do business with an entity that is clearly unstable and riddled with deceit. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the podium. By all means, Eleanor, let your lawyers proceed. I would absolutely love for them to depose Derek under oath. I'm sure he'd be fascinating on the stand, explaining all those off-book liabilities and the phantom revenue streams. My legal team, I assure you, is very much looking forward to discovery. A long, tense silence descended. The fight seemed to drain out of Eleanor, leaving her looking old and suddenly frail. A gray-haired board member, one of the longest-serving independents, a man named Arthur Kensington, cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. Mr. Hayes, he said, his voice grave. Miss Chen, forgive me, Mr. Hayes. Given these extraordinary and deeply troubling circumstances, it seems clear that this board may need to discuss immediate and drastic leadership transitions. Leadership transitions? Derek's voice cracked, a note of disbelief and dawning horror in his tone. But this is our company, the Vance family company. Actually, Derek, I said, my voice quiet but firm, as I slid a single sealed manila envelope across the polished table towards Arthur Kensington. Not for much longer, not in its current form anyway. Inside that envelope were two meticulously drafted documents. Options. Option 1, I stated, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces in the room. Vance Industries agrees to a full board-approved restructuring, effective immediately. Derek Vance resigns from all positions and holdings within the company, also effective immediately, with a full and public apology for his mismanagement. Aunt Eleanor, you will announce your immediate retirement from the chairmanship and all executive duties. The board then appoints new, independent leadership, vetted and approved by a committee, which, I will add, will include a non-voting representative from Apex Solutions. Under this option, Apex Solutions will agree to continue a significantly scaled-down but stable partnership with the newly restructured Vance Industries, under strict performance oversight, and with full transparency. A heavy pause. Then, Eleanor's voice, barely a whisper, and option 2, Ethan? I let the silence stretch for a beat, allowing the weight of their predicament to fully sink in. Option 2, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion, is that I walk. Every single contract between Apex Solutions and Vance Industries is terminated, effective end of business day Friday. All $60 million of annual revenue gone, just like that. And on Monday morning, my legal team will forward the entirety of our forensic audit findings, every fraudulent transaction, every cooked book, every hidden loss, to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Illinois Attorney General's office, and, just for good measure, the IRS. I suspect they'll find it very interesting reading. I glanced at my watch again. You have 1 hour to deliberate and to inform me of your collective decision. This isn't business, Ethan, Derek spat, a last desperate surge of defiance. This is pure, vindictive revenge. You're enjoying this, aren't you? No, cousin, I said quietly, my voice calm but carrying an unmistakable finality. It's exactly what you and your mother always told me business was: ruthless, merit-based, and ultimately, only for those strong enough, smart enough, and resilient enough to prove they truly belong. You just never imagined I would be the one setting the terms. I gathered my tablet, my notebook, my silence. I'll be in the CEO's office suite down the hall. The one, I added, pausing at the door and looking directly at Eleanor, you once so kindly informed me I'd never, ever deserve to even set foot in. Funny how things change, isn't it? I left them there, surrounded by the damning reports, the irrefutable evidence of their failings, and a rising tide of well-deserved panic. The air was thick with their fear, their shattered pride, their dawning comprehension of just how badly they had underestimated me. By the time I reached the opulent, if somewhat dated CEO suite, Aunt Eleanor's inner sanctum, my phone was already vibrating nonstop in my pocket. I didn't need to look to know who it was. My mother, Eleanor's younger sister, no doubt hysterical. Ethan, how could you do this to your aunt, to the family? My father, usually more measured, but fiercely protective of his wife's family name. Son, this isn't how we handle things. You're tearing the family apart. And then, the texts from my other cousins, the ones who had always been pleasant enough to my face but had silently benefited from the Vance nepotism. You've ruined us, Ethan. How could you be so cruel? We grew up together. I ignored them all, every last guilt-tripping, manipulative message. Instead, I opened my laptop, navigated to a deeply buried folder in my email archives, and found a message I'd saved for 6 long years. The official rejection email, sent from Eleanor Vance's personal account. Dear Ethan, it began, the polite, condescending tone still capable of making my jaw clench. While we admire your ambition and your academic achievements, after careful consideration, we feel you currently lack the specific leadership instincts and practical business acumen required for a substantive role at Vance Industries. Perhaps a position with fewer strategic responsibilities, something more administrative, would better suit your current strengths. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. Sincerely, Eleanor Vance, Chairwoman, Vance Industries. I smiled, a grim, tight smile of vindication. And then, with a decisive click, I moved the email from Save to Archive. Its purpose had been served. I then hit print. I took the single sheet of paper over to what would very shortly be my new, albeit temporary, command center, Eleanor's massive, ornate desk. I placed the printed rejection email squarely in the center of the gleaming mahogany, a small, personal reminder. The board, now staring at the undeniable, devastating evidence of Derek's prolonged fraudulent reporting, the systemic rot within the company, and their absolute, critical reliance on Apex Solutions for sheer survival, really only had one rational path forward. Accept my terms, however bitter the pill, or face complete and utter annihilation. Financial ruin, regulatory investigations, public disgrace, and very possibly criminal charges for Derek and anyone else complicit. It wasn't much of a choice, really. By sunset, as the Chicago skyline began to glitter against the darkening sky, it was done. The call came through from Arthur Kensington just before the 1-hour deadline expired. Option 1. Derek Vance resigned, his exit as quiet and unceremonious as it was long overdue. No golden parachute, no face-saving consultancy role, just gone. Aunt Eleanor, stripped of her power and influence, her reputation in tatters, was pressured by the remaining independent board members into an immediate early retirement. A retirement that no one in that shell-shocked room, not even her staunchest old guard allies, tried to fight. Her reign was over. And Vance Industries, once a seemingly unshakable fortress of nepotism, old money pride, and arrogant complacency, would be thoroughly restructured from top to bottom under the strict oversight of a new, independent board, and by extension, under my watchful eye. The family empire they had once so smugly claimed I wasn't fit to even be a minor part of would now, in a very real sense, report to me. The irony was almost too perfect. Noah Miller stepped into the suite just as the last of the preliminary agreement papers were being digitally signed and transmitted by the Vance lawyers. He was carrying a bottle of very good to very chilled champagne and 2 flutes. A wide, satisfied grin stretched across his face. "Congratulations, Ethan," he said, expertly popping the cork. The sound was a small, celebratory punctuation mark at the end of a very long, very intense chapter. "On your remarkably elegant, if somewhat brutal, takeover." I took the offered flute, the cool glass a welcome sensation in my hand. "Not a takeover, Noah," I replied, my voice quiet. I walked over to the vast panoramic window, looking down at the city lights twinkling below. Far down, I could just make out 2 figures, Derek and Eleanor, emerging from a side entrance of the building, quietly packing some personal effects into the trunk of a waiting car. They looked small, defeated. "Just business. The kind of business," I added, a faint smile touching my lips. "They always told me I'd never understand." My phone buzzed again on the desk. I glanced at the screen. Dozens of new, unread messages from the extended family. My mother, "Ethan, you didn't have to humiliate them like this. There were other ways." My father, "This isn't how family is supposed to handle conflict. This is a tragedy." My various cousins, a chorus of outrage and disbelief. "We grew up together, Ethan. How could you do this to us? To the Vance name?" I picked up the phone, opened the family group chat, a chat I'd been mostly silent in for years, and typed out a single, concise message. "Don't worry yourselves about the family name. Vance Industries is finally in qualified, competent hands." Then I hit send, turned off the ringer, and set the phone down, screen side down, on the desk. I turned back to the window, watching the last vestiges of twilight fade over Lake Michigan, the city lights reflecting like scattered diamonds on the dark water. As the sun finally sank completely behind the distant skyline, a new kind of peace, a profound sense of quiet clarity, settled over me. It wasn't the fleeting peace of external approval or grudging recognition from those who had once scorned me. No, this was something deeper, more intrinsic. It was the quiet, unshakable clarity of earned power, the profound satisfaction of a debt, long owed, finally being settled, not in anger, but in undeniable, irrefutable competence. Because sometimes I realized, true success isn't about finally getting that job you once begged for, or being accepted into the club that once slammed its doors in your face. Sometimes, it's about building something so substantial, so undeniable, so powerful in its own right, that they are eventually forced, by the sheer gravity of your achievement, to sit across the table from you, not as superiors, but as supplicants, forced to negotiate, forced to acknowledge. And sometimes I mused, taking a slow sip of the excellent champagne, the best, most satisfying form of revenge isn't loud or explosive or destructive at all. It's quiet. It's precise. It's simply becoming their boss. Or in this case, the one who decides if they even get to have a company left to boss around. Aunt Eleanor had been right about one thing, though, all those years ago. I wasn't qualified to work at the old Vance Industries, the one mired in its own arrogance and decay. No, it turned out I was qualified to own it, or at least to own its future. And that, I thought, was a much more fitting role. Looking back, that whole ordeal, those 6 years of grinding work and the final, intense confrontation, it wasn't just about business, or even about some calculated revenge. Not really. It was about reclaiming my own story, about proving to myself, more than anyone, that their judgment, their dismissal, didn't define me. It was about the quiet, relentless strength that builds when you refuse to let bitterness consume you, and instead channel that fire into creating something real, something lasting. It was about finally understanding my own worth, on my own terms. What about you? Have you ever been in a situation where you were underestimated, overlooked, or deliberately shut out by people who should have been in your corner, who were supposed to believe in you? I genuinely love to hear how you navigated that, how you kept going, or even just how you felt. Share your story down in the comments. I make a point to read every single one. Sometimes just knowing someone else has walked a similar path can make all the difference. If any part of my journey, my struggle, my eventual quiet triumph resonated with you, if it sparked something, I'd be honored if you hit that subscribe button. Not just to support this channel, but to support yourself, to remind yourself that these stories of resilience matter. Because tales like this, they aren't just about settling scores or power plays. They're about finding your voice when others try to silence it, about fiercely honoring your own intrinsic worth, and ultimately, about rewriting your own damn place in the world, one determined step at a time. Here's what I know for sure now. You don't need anyone's permission to begin your journey. You absolutely don't need their approval to grow and to evolve. And you definitely don't need anyone else's blessing to become the person you were always meant to be, the person you deep down know you are. So, go ahead. Metaphorically, or even literally, archive that old rejection, whatever form it took in your life. Build the thing they said you couldn't. Create the reality they never envisioned for you. And when they finally, inevitably recognize you, make damn sure it's on your terms. Because you refuse to disappear, refuse to be erased, refuse to be anything less than who you are. Until then, I'll be right here, sharing more stories like mine, and genuinely waiting and hoping to hear yours. Because sometimes the most powerful, most transformative success story starts with a single resounding no. A no that you, and only you, have the power to turn into rocket fuel. And if you're able to and feel inclined, a super thanks is always deeply appreciated. It helps us continue to bring these stories of challenge and redemption to light, helping us all on our healing journeys. Thank you for listening.